How the people are doing? So, the exams are finally over. It just, it honestly baffles me how frustrating those exams can be with like the timing and just the amount of time it takes to finish them. And it's too much effort for a lot of crap. Let's just ignore it for now. So, we can finally get back to the camera comparisons for the Pixel 7 Pro. I managed to finish off most of the photography comparisons, but videos, we didn't get to touch that. So that's exactly what we're going to be checking out today against the S22 Ultra. Now the S22 Ultra, in my opinion at least, it has probably the absolute best video in Android devices, at least among the ones that I've used thus far. The S22 has consistently been able to be on the top when it comes to videography. Now of course the iPhone is better than the S22 Ultra in some cases, not absolutely everything, but it is better. I would consider that to be better, but today we are not comparing it to the iPhone, we're comparing to the S22 Ultra, and I think this is going to be a fair comparison as such, but also a fairly interesting one. So let's jump right in. So, as usual, we are kicking things off with selfie video on both phones. Now, usually I complain about one of these two phones having lower resolution for selfie video, but that's not the case. As you can see, 4K on both. That feels good to say, because the only other time that I can say this is when I'm comparing the S22 Ultra to the iPhone 14 Pro, or when I compared it. But anyways, point is that this is by far the third phone from a different company that I've used that has 4K selfie video. Quite a nice thing to have, even though, not for me, because I don't really take selfie video all that much. But hey, if I wanted to, I would like it in 4K. Now the Pixel also offers speech enhancement. Now how well this works and whether or not it can really cancel out the loud AC noise happening in the background and so on and so forth, how it compares to the S22 Ultra, which does have directional audio and so on, but we'll see. I haven't used this before. I'm definitely looking forward to seeing how well Google can fine-tune this with software. Now, the Pixel also does offer 4K 60. Just so you know, this 4K 30 that we're shooting at, 4K 60 is also possible with the front cameras. And now, another thing that the Pixel offers is HDR with the front cameras. So naturally, we're using a sort of backlit situation right here to really drive home that point. But yeah, HDR on the front cameras, we don't get that option on the S22 Ultra. We have that on the rear cameras. We will test that out when the time comes. But on the front cameras, we don't really get that option. That's quite an interesting thing to see, that the Pixel is offering something that the Samsung doesn't, feature-wise. That's definitely not something that you see every day. Now indeed, the Pixel does have HDR on the front cameras, but Samsung over here provides us with fairly decent quality portrait video mode. Now, we do have cinematic video on the Pixel, but we cannot use the front camera for it. Now, I don't know how much people really want to use that feature, how popular it really is, but if I wanted to use it, I guess selfie video would be a really nice place for it, because you want your face to be center framed, and that's basically the ideal conditions for portrait video to work. All right, so let's just talk about the audio side of things first. We'll get to video. Oh yes, we will. But anyways, the audio. Well, without speech enhancement, I do think that the Pixel is less muffled but also has more background noise, while the S22 is basically the opposite. But with speech enhancement, well, I do think that the Pixel does sound a little bit better. It doesn't sound as muffled as the S22, but it does manage to remove a little bit more background noise. I mean, it's not the biggest difference in the world. It's not going to make or break your video when you're taking selfie videos, but hey, I do think that the Pixel does deserve credit for having slightly better audio. But well, the video that accompanies it, well, that's it's a disappointment to say the very least, I guess, because yeah, let's just say that the resolution doesn't exactly translate here, now does it? Because the 4K on the S22 is miles ahead of the Pixel 7 Pro. I'm honestly very disappointed and surprised, because when I first saw that we could take 4K video from the selfie camera on the Pixel, I guess I kind of fell into my own trap there. I let my expectations soar a little too high, and well, now I'm just stranded disappointed, And then for HDR, well, I do think that the HDR works. It does lift out the shadows, give you a little bit more shadow detail as such, but because the video quality is not that good, it actually makes the pixel look worse, because you get even more noise, you get even less detail, and there's this weird smudging artifact that keeps happening. And then finally, for portrait video with selfie camera, well, the funny part here is that the S22, while it's using portrait video and while it has 1080p compared to the 4K on the Pixel, it manages to bring out significantly higher detail compared to the Pixel. Now yes, the S22 does have slightly higher noise compared to the Pixel in this case, because of probably, the whole portrait mode situation, but I mean, this just drives home the point that the Pixel doesn't have good video quality with the front camera. But let's be honest, for someone like me, as I said, even while shooting the video, I don't take selfie video all that much. I mean, it's great to have good selfie video, but if you don't take it, it's kind of irrelevant, right? So for me, the biggest thing is going to be with the rear cameras, and that's exactly where things get very interesting. So as you can see, with 4K 30, both phones are fairly close now. The detail level is really nice on both. I do think the S22 tends to sharpen things a lot. Now in motion, it doesn't look as drastic. I do see some over sharpening happening and some of the leaves and so on. The Pixel doesn't do that all that much. That's one minor difference, and I also think that the Pixel is generally brighter, and even in terms of dynamic range, both look quite nice. As you can see, we're shooting at the sunset sun. Well, not exactly sunset, it was a little bit before that, but that just goes to show that it looks really nice on both. I'm not really complaining here about the Pixel 7 Pro's video quality either. Although to be fair, there were some desaturation white balance shifts happening on the Pixel in some areas, especially when shooting backlit. Now as for ultra-wide video, well, now I do think that the Pixel is not as detailed as the S22 Ultra. Now I'm looking at this in full resolution on a larger display, so the difference is much more apparent to me than it is probably going to be to you after YouTube compression especially. But yeah, for the most part, I do think the Pixel has slightly lower detail and just slightly higher noise levels as well. Moving on, however, to 4K 60 with the main cameras, and yeah, once again, we have minute level of difference. And I do think that the S22 doesn't sharpen as much with 4K 60, so now the difference is even less than what we had in 4K 30. As for 4K 60 with the ultrawide, it's a similar difference to what we had with 4K 30, because the S22 does look sharper. I do see a fair bit more texture on the road. That's kind of a very good indication of which one has slightly more detail compared to the Pixel at least. And up next, let's check out the versatility. So the Pixel can go from the ultrawide to the main camera, and then it can go to a 2x. Now I believe this is a sensor crop, and the quality doesn't look half bad, but it's never going to be optical zoom quality either. It's fine, you can definitely use it maybe for a social media video or something like that, where the video will get compressed eventually anyways. You can probably get away with using the 2x sensor crop, but ideally you want to stick to either 1x zoom, or if you really want to zoom in, then go all the way to 5x, because that is optical. And as you can see, the optical 5x zoom looks really nice. As for the S22 Ultra, well, I don't think this one needs any explanation for versatility at least. We have the ultra-wide camera, we have the main camera, and then of course we have the 3x telephoto. Now this gives us a really nice high quality optical zoom range for medium zoom, 10x of course. Now this is ideally going to be used when you really want to zoom in and get real up close and personal, but ideally, again, you want to stand still while you're shooting it, because then you can get some really nice and fairly stable optical zoomed in video on the S22. Now as for super stable video on both, well, I guess the resolution is the same, but the Pixel, it looks very mushy. I mean, there are very few details that are properly visible. I mean, if you look at the road, I'm sure even after YouTube compression you guys can see the massive difference in detail. I mean, I kind of expected a little bit better from the Pixel, because it was performing really well up until now, let's face it. It had really good and comparable detail levels in 4K 30, 4K 60 and so on, but with Super Steady at least, it's not exactly in the usable category, while the S22, despite the fact that I do think that 1080p is not nearly enough for modern day video, for Super Steady I guess it's fine. Now then, HDR with the rear cameras. it appears we have a similar issue going on that we saw with the front cameras as well, because as you can see, the Pixel's HDR video does not look very good. I would say that the normal 4K 30 from the Pixel looked far better compared to the HDR, so my recommendation would be don't use HDR. Probably because the Pixel is lifting up the shadows a lot and then trying to reduce the noise because of that, so in a way it's kind of shooting itself in the foot by doing so. And then 8K on the S22 Ultra. Well, we don't get that option on the Pixel, although technically it is capable. It has a 50 megapixel sensor. It should be able to take proper 8K video, but it can't. The S22 can, however, but there are basically two issues here for the S22. It's a massive crop, which is very evident, and then of course there's the fact that you're going to get slightly worse stabilization as well. Now, it's not terrible. You can walk around with 8K video. Samsung has improved on that a fair bit, to be entirely honest, but it's still a bit of an issue. At the detail levels, we'll get to that in a moment, because first we gotta check out exactly how much details both of these phones can preserve with regular 4K 30. After all, that is the mode that most people will use majority of the time. So let's zoom right into 500%, and you can very clearly see that the S22 Ultra is sharpening things up a fair bit more. There's a bunch of haloing going on, and if anything, I would say the Pixel is doing a fantastic job without sharpening. And you know, technically it is doing a better job with details with regular main camera 4K 30 compared to the S22 Ultra, so that's quite impressive if you ask me. And then as for 8K, well, of course I had to compensate to the best possible extent that I could humanly fathom for the massive crop that the S22 Ultra has. And well, if we were to zoom into 500%, as you can see, there is a difference. I do think the S22 has slightly better detail compared to the Pixel for obvious reasons. I mean, it's 8K versus 4K. If there wasn't a difference, that would be a much bigger concern, but there is a difference. And the real question that I have to ask is it really worth it? Like, how often do you even end up using 8K? And even if you do, are you really benefiting from having this difference in detail? Personally, for me, you know, it doesn't matter as much. Like, yeah, it's good to have, but you know, if the Pixel doesn't have it, then it's not the worst thing in the world. It's not going to cause a mental breakdown for me. That's essentially what I'm saying. Now, whether or not it's going to be worth it for you, that's going to be entirely up to you guys to decide. Now, as for the ultra-wide camera, now this is where it gets a little interesting, because as you can see, the moment we zoom in, yeah, the difference is very apparent, isn't it? So on one hand, we have the S22 Ultra, which does have more detail because it's sharpening things up so damn much. It does give you slightly better texture. You can see it in the finger, you can see it on the lips, and more importantly, you can actually make out the eye much more clearly, just hidden behind the hair strands right there. While on the Pixel, it's all muddied up. It's probably because of noise reduction. You know, you get this noise reduction artifact happening on the Pixel as well. But the S22 does have its over sharpening artifacts. You can see haloing around almost every little edge, and there is a ton of noise and grain compared to the Pixel. We also got to keep in mind the fact that we are looking at a 500% crop. No one crops into 500%, especially for the ultra-wide camera. So is this difference really going to be a deal breaker? I don't think so, but if you really want to use ultra-wide cameras, then you're going to have to decide. Do you prefer a sharpened look, or do you prefer a less sharpened but also a slightly softer look? But then moving right on over to low light video. This is with the main camera, and I think the biggest difference is in the fact that the Pixel has a fair few more jerks happening, and it really does mess up the stabilization and everything a fair bit more than the S22. The S22 has some jerks, but it's not as drastic or as bad as the Pixel. Another thing that I'm noticing is that with the sky, the S22 has a fair bit more noise than the Pixel, but the Pixel, it really makes it look blue, doesn't it? It obviously looks fairly unnatural. It's not supposed to be blue, not by a long shot. But yeah, that's basically the difference you're dealing with. And honestly, I think for the most part, I prefer the S22 simply because of the stabilization in low light. Now on the ultra wide side of things, yeah, I would just recommend not using it because it's really not worth it. You're not exactly getting good video quality from the S22's ultra-wide camera, and it's the same story for the Pixel 7 Pro. So yeah, you're just going to get a blanket of noise with just very minute details present in there. So yeah, ultra-wide low-light video not exactly good on either. As for slow motion, we have 1080p 240 on both phones, and well, I must admit, the S22 looks nice. It has a flatter look in general, but the Pixel, with the higher contrast and the slightly higher vibrance, it's not oversaturating here, which is a really important thing. But it does add a little bit more sharpening in there as well, which just overall really looks nice here. I mean, I'm pretty sure you guys can tell. Every little bubble in the water and everything, it just looks really nice and crisp compared to the S22, which has a generally more neutralized look to it. I mean, yeah, that can be your preference. Maybe that's the kind of slow motion video you want, but personally speaking, I like my slow motion video to be dramatic. That's kind of the entire point of using slow motion for me. So I do like the Pixel in this case. I definitely prefer the way it looks. And well, that brings us to the end of this camera comparison. Well, for videos, you know, I expected the Pixel to perform worse, believe it or not, because I expected a lot more issues with the rear cameras. On the front camera, I was actually surprised. I thought it might perform better, but it didn't. You know, front camera is not good on the Pixel 7 Pro for videography. But for video with the rear cameras, there are things that the S22 is slightly better at, but there are also a lot of characteristics that are just different. Like for example, the Pixel has a softer look with less sharpening, while the S22 has more digital sharpening happening. Now, which one you want, that's going to depend entirely on you. So, with all of that said, I do think that the Pixel is not just a photography-centric device anymore, like at least compared to previous versions far as I know about them. You know, they used to be pretty terrible at video. Now they are fairly comparable. Not the best, you know, not the most fully fledged for videography, but they are fairly nice. And I do hope you guys found this helpful, because I know that videography can be, you know, a point of concern when it comes to Pixels. And well, I don't think it is anymore. Unless you really wanted good selfie video, well then you're not in luck. But yeah, I do hope you guys had a good time with this, found it helpful, and well, I'll be seeing you guys soon enough with another camera comparison, probably with the iPhone soon enough. Cheers.